Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia meeting with President Trump at the White House. The new Middle East taking shape under this second Trump administration. Meanwhile, a huge win for the administration at the United Nations yesterday, something that we don't say very often. The city of North Carolina up in arms over righteous ICE immigration enforcement operations and the Epstein files. A big vote set for today. All of that and more on today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Mohammed bin Salman, maybe you know him, maybe you don't. He is the man of the hour today in Washington, D.C. Mohammed bin Salman has been the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia for close to a decade now. I say de facto because he's not actually technically the leader of the country. Technically, that is King Salman. He is the crown prince. So it is not an official head of state visit for those who keep score at home and take note of such formalities and technicalities. But the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has been running the show. He's been running the show for a very long time now, and he has been very close to the Trump administration, both in the first iteration of the administration, when he was known to be very chummy with Jared Kushner, one of Donald Trump's top Middle East envoys, and he's remained largely chummy with the Trump administration this time around as well. When you think back to Donald Trump's major trip to the Middle East, which he took back in May, earlier this year in the springtime, he started that trip in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, before then going to Doha, Qatar, and then going to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. He started that trip in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There was that huge conference, a big joint U.S.-Saudi investment conference. Notably, and the symbolism, trust me, was not missed in the Middle East, which pays very close attention to such things. Notably, that is exactly where Donald Trump began his very first overseas trip all the way back in the day in 2017. Those of you who have a long enough memory might remember this photo went viral on Twitter back in the day. It was Donald Trump and Mohammed bin Salman and a few others, especially the Arabs with the traditional white outfit with the black headbands. I'm not going to get the Arab names right, doesn't really matter. And they're standing around this orb. Y'all remember that? It was the orb. It was the mysterious orb. So that was in Riyadh, 8.5 years ago, in May of 2017. So similarly, in this big Middle East trip earlier this year, Donald Trump goes to Riyadh. Now, there are a lot of reasons why Donald Trump has gone out of his way to try to bring Saudi Arabia, which is a critically important country when it comes to energy, when it comes to national security, when it comes to terrorism, when it comes to great power competition against China. There are plenty of reasons that Donald Trump has welcomed Mohammed bin Salman in and tried to make as favorable and indeed as aggressive inroads as possible. And they really have rolled out the red carpet for him. For instance, here was the flyover earlier today at the White House. Go ahead and watch this. Yeah, so there you have it. So again, Mohammed bin Salman, not the official leader, is not a technically head of state visit. It doesn't really matter. He's the guy. He's the guy, and the Trump administration is wooing him very, very, very dearly. Among the items that are on the agenda currently in Washington, D.C. that have been discussed today and will be discussed tonight, they are bringing in Tiger Woods and Elon Musk. They're bringing in all the A-list talent at again, don't call it head of state dinner, but at a quasi-semi-formal head of state dinner for Mohammed bin Salman tonight, Tiger Woods and Elon Musk. Among the orders of business that will be discussed this afternoon, probably into this evening, maybe even tomorrow morning, who knows exactly how much time they are devoting to this, but there are a lot of very important items here. It seems that a sale of F-35 planes is all but a foregone conclusion. This has been a controversial item for years now. There have been a lot of defense experts, a lot of policy wonks, folks who care about Middle East relations, who have vested interests one way or the other, who feel strongly about America's commitments overseas in one way or another. This is, in very kind of wonky niche circles, this has been an ongoing debate for years, is the extent to which the United States should arm Saudi Arabia, including with the advanced fighter planes known as the F-35s. Technically, the F-35s not quite as advanced as they were a few years ago. It seems, based on all indications, and this has not yet been formally announced, But by the time Mohammed bin Salman leaves Washington, D.C., there is a very real chance that that F-35 deal will be signed. Now, the U.S. does have a commitment under the force of law when it comes to their Middle East posture to ensure that Israel has what the defense industry refers to as a qualitative military edge, sometimes called QME for short. This is defense DC Beltway jargon for essentially saying that it is literally a decades-long policy going back a very, very, very long time that the United States is legally committed to ensuring that of all of our Middle East allies, that Israel has, again, what's referred to as a qualitative military advantage over all Middle Eastern countries. The reasons for that are fairly straightforward. This is the only country that shares essentially all of our major strategic and national security interests there, even holding aside all of the various other moral and theological and philosophical reasons there. But it's really grounded in hard-headed national security realism. So one debate about F-35 planes to Saudi Arabia is how this possibly squares with QME, with the U.S.'s qualitative military edge commitment to Israel. I personally tend to be pretty bullish when it comes to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman. If you're just kind of getting to know Mohammed bin Salman, here's essentially what you have to know. What you need to know is that prior to his becoming the de facto leader, Saudi Arabia was a very, very, very troubled place. Saudi Arabia was the country, after all, that produced the majority of the 9/11 hijackers. Most of those hijackers were Saudi nationals. Most of them were here on some variety of visa, tourist visa, some sort of other temporary visa. Most of them overstayed their visas, which, by the way, is why the 9/11 Commission a few years later said that biometric visa tracking is an absolute must when it comes to American national security. So most of them were Saudi nationals. And back in the day, the Saudis were indeed probably the world's #1 funder and bankroller of radical Sunni Islamism, of the Muslim Brotherhood, of Wahhabism, of all these various radical strands of Sunni ideology bleeding into outright jihad support. That has really changed, at least from a regime perspective, over the past decade. I'm not saying that every normal Saudi in the streets, many of them will have opinions that I might find disfavorable and you might find disfavorable when it comes to the notion of jihad or Sharia law or their view of Jews, Christians, and so-called infidels more generally. But from a regime level, Mohammed bin Salman has really taken Saudi Arabia in a very, very pro-Western direction. He has done this from an economic perspective when it comes to what he refers to as Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. 2030 is kind of coming up, to be honest with you. It's only 5 years away. I'm sure those conversations are proceeding in Washington, D.C. today. Vision 2030 is basically the Saudi Arabian national plan to try to diversify the economy, to try to make it less dependent on their bread and butter staple, which is the energy industry, which is their abundant flows of petroleum, hydrocarbons, oil, and natural gas. They're trying to build up all sorts of other industries as well. The Saudis have spent a lot of money when it comes to things actually such as professional sports. I'm a huge Formula One racing fan. You probably didn't know that. I watch every single race, every single qualifying session. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which is in the city of Jeddah on the Red Sea, on the western coast of Saudi Arabia, is a very splashy, flashy Grand Prix. It's a night race with the lights there. They're trying to build up to an extent Jeddah on the Red Sea to kind of be their analog of Dubai in the UAE. They've splurged a ton of money when it comes to professional soccer. Cristiano Ronaldo with this gargantuan contract playing for the soccer team there in Saudi Arabia. Golf, Live Golf, is very much funded in large part by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. So they're trying to make Western inroads when it comes to all of the above. But most importantly, and this is the crux, what Saudi Arabia under MBS has done is they've really cut off the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, at an official level, I'm not saying that you're not going to find random Saudis on the streets of Riyadh or Mecca who don't praise Hamas or various other Muslim Brotherhood outfits. I'm sure you will. I have zero doubt that. But I'm saying from the regime perspective, when it comes to official Saudi government policy, the Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR, frankly, actually, the Council on American Islamic Relations, are very much treated as terrorist organizations, or at least in the case of CAIR, as de facto terrorist organizations. There was this amazing clip, actually, that I saw, I believe it was in Mecca, in the holiest city for Islam there, which is right in the heart of Saudi Arabia. I saw this amazing clip at some point over the course of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, so over the past year and a half. Someone starts starts flying the PLO flag, the Palestine Liberation Organization flag, otherwise known as the Palestinian flag, which is pretty ubiquitous these days on college campuses. And this clip of someone outside of a holy mosque in Mecca, this dude is waving the PLO flag, and like within seconds, he's arrested by Saudi authorities. Within seconds, because they have no tolerance for the Muslim Brotherhood, for Islamism, and for Islamist adjacent organizations such as Hamas, such as to an extent the PLO, and more generally speaking, the so-called Palestinian Arab cause. So you really might honestly say here that Saudi Arabia is actually tougher on the so-called Palestinian Arab issue and the Palestinian Arab cause than Harvard University and Columbia University. I mean, what a time to be alive, frankly, when you think of it from that perspective. So he really has taken the country in a more reformist direction. Now, it's not perfect. The Saudis do play it both ways, not necessarily when it comes to the terrorism issue, but when it comes to the grand strategy issue. And this is one of the other reasons that bringing Saudi Arabia closer to the American sphere of influence is important, is because during the Biden administration interregnum, during those horrific 4 years of 40-year high inflation, all sorts of various maladies on the world stage, during the 4 years of the Biden interregnum before Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, China, the People's Republic of China, under their sprawling Belt and Road Initiative, which is their all-encompassing, exhaustive foreign policy goal to essentially try to homogenize the world as much as they can in the Chinese image, it very much reached the heart of the Middle East. And there was a major deal during the Biden administration signed between the Saudis and China to allow for the building of Chinese infrastructure. That was around the time of 2022, give or take, in the first year and a half, 2 years or so of the Biden administration. It was around that time as well that the Saudis, as well as the Emiratis, their close allies in the UAE, both had a formal and diplomatic rapprochement. They reformalized relations with Iran, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which the Saudis are very fearful of, and they're not particularly big fans of Iran. But this is what happens when you have a very weak American administration. This is what happens when you have a completely tepid and feckless American foreign policy and a complete lack of any assertiveness of American national interest in the region, is that you're going to take these secondary American allies, such as Saudi Arabia, and just push them further and further and further away. But in reality, it is really important that we have Saudi Arabia closer to our interests there. Saudi Arabia sits at the intersection of, well, frankly, of the world. That's why they call it the Middle East, right? But at the intersection also of some of the world's most important waterways when it comes to international shipping, when it comes to the Red Sea, when it comes to the Suez Canal, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which is a massive, massive little channel separating the Arabian Peninsula to Iran itself. So much oil flows through there from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, all of the above. So they're in a very, very strategic location. And yes, even though the Saudis are infamously terrible when it comes to actually operating military machinery, it's like a bad joke in Washington, is that the Saudis know how to purchase a plane, but they don't know how to fly it. Despite that, in theory, with American training, they could, again, in theory, if they didn't actually just totally suck at flying planes and operating them, they could, in theory, be a decent counterbalance, a decent counterweight to Iran and various other geopolitical actors in the region that really are more aggressively hostile to American interests. Now, there's another thing on the agenda in addition to the F-35s. There is this notion of a possible U.S. defense deal with Saudi Arabia, similar to the deal that, unfortunately, from my perspective, that Donald Trump signed with Qatar earlier this year, just a few months ago. That was unfortunate. Donald Trump signed this executive order that basically said that an attack on Qatar shall be construed as an attack on the United States, which is total garbage, if we're just being very honest here. I mean, there is no America First case for committing the United States NATO Article 5 style to defend Qatar, the world's number one funder and bankroller of the Muslim Brotherhood and Sunni Islamism. It's completely outrageous, and the extent to which this administration is cozy and perhaps frankly slightly more than cozy with Qatar, that's a conversation for another day. There is a stronger case, I guess, for something like that with Saudi Arabia, but there still really is no compelling need for that. There still is no America First case that I am seeing clearly for a NATO Article 5 style, an attack on one is an attack on all defense pledge when it comes to defending the territorial integrity of Saudi Arabia. notably Israel, which, the folks from the Mamdani left to the Tucker Carlson so-called right, they say it controls American foreign policy. The Jews, Israel, they control this. Notably, Israel does not even have that. Israel does not have a NATO Article 5 style defense pledge, or frankly, anything remotely close to that. So we already have Qatar that just got one, actually after Israel attacked Hamas top brass outside Doha, Qatar. Qatar got that from the Trump administration. We'll see if Saudi Arabia gets it as well. I would personally be much more willing to see some sort of quid pro quo here when it comes to this particular issue, when it comes to the defense pact, frankly, even the F-35s. But the F-35s can be more or less rationalized and explained by sheer dint of the fact that manned fighter jets are inherently becoming more obsolete in real time as we get more into the day and age of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. So there's going to be something of an inventory in the warehouse, if you catch my drift, when it comes to F-35s. These planes are already a few years old. So if you can get a decent penny and kind of pad the Pentagon's bottom line and try to rectify that balance sheet, and has an extraordinarily bloated budget as it is, well, frankly, it's not the end of the world. But especially when it comes to this defense pact, I would feel a lot better about the Saudi defense pact if there were a more concerted effort made from the administration to try to get Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords, into these rapprochement and normalization deals that the Trump administration really executed quite perfectly its first time around in the very final months of the first term. Those are the deals whereby Israel normalized relations with the help of the United States, with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, all part of this counter Sharia supremacism, counter Islamism, counter Muslim Brotherhood, and above all, counter Iran alliance. Saudi Arabia back then gave its tacit imprimatur of legitimacy, shall we say. It basically told the Emiratis, okay, you guys go be the guinea pigs. Let's see how this plays out for you. Well, it's played out pretty well. I mean, objectively, the Abraham Accords played out pretty well. How do I know that? Because they're still here. Because October 7th happened. And the most divisive thing in the region that could have basically ever happened. A massive war in Gaza happened, and the peace deals are still here. So it is time for Saudi Arabia to formally join the Abraham Accords. They were very close to doing so the first time around. A friend of mine who worked closely on such matters in the first Trump administration in the White House told me at the end of that administration that they were on the 5-yard line, to use a football analogy. They were very, very, very close to getting MBS and the Saudis into the Accords. Given that, I would have much preferred to see a much stronger push from the administration, both at the Riyadh conference back in May, before they inked this gargantuan investment between the Saudis and the United States, both then and now, when it comes to the promise of F-35s and/or this possible NATO Article 5 style defense pledge. I would have much preferred to see this tied to Saudi Arabia actually normalize relations and formally joining the Abraham Accords. That, to me, that would have been a really good thing. I have not seen a tremendous indication that is necessarily happening right now. Again, maybe, who knows, maybe Tiger Woods will ask a good question at dinner tonight. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, right? But short of that, it seems to me like that thus far is missing in action. In other Middle East news, though, there was a tremendous victory for the Trump administration at the United Nations yesterday. And the timing of this is quite serendipitous to coincide with the MBS, not technically a state visit to the White House. So yesterday, the United Nations, the UN Security Council in particular, approved, and this is a shocking level of consensus at the UN, by a 13-0 count with China and Russia abstaining, they approved the Trump administration's 20-point plan for peace in Gaza, which is a generally pro-America, pro-Israel, Western-friendly plan. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I mean, is Hamas actually going to disarm? I mean, color me a skeptic there. But my friend Eugene Kontarovich, the well-known international law expert and a Heritage Foundation visiting fellow, senior research fellow at Heritage, he had a really nice tweet thread explaining the significance of the UN Security Council ratifying by 13-0 vote. By the way, you had numerous Arab countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they all signed on, actually, to this Trump administration peace plan in Gaza. Really big deal. Here is how Professor Kontarovich breaks it down. The UN has now given its backing to the 20-point plan for Gaza, which shows how Trump's practical diplomacy now commands center stage in the world. It's a major diplomatic win. The Security Council also makes clear that a Palestinian state does not exist. This should be the death knell for international criminal court proceedings, and it should embarrass all those who have pretended otherwise, from Paris and London to international law academia. The Security Council also makes clear that there is no legal or practical obligation to create a Palestinian state. That is based on the specific language from the Trump administration's 20-point plan that they went ahead and ratified here as part of the UN Security Council on Monday, November 17th. So that is a really, really, really nice win for the Trump administration when it comes to diplomacy. And frankly, it's a really nice win when it comes to all of us who oppose, for one reason or another, the existence of yet another Arab state in the heart of the Middle East, which would become an Iranian Sharia supremacist satrapy overnight. There is zero, and I've said this many times, there is zero American national interest in yet another Arab terror state in the Middle East, let alone one right in the heart of the Levant, right in the heart of the Holy Land, holding aside religion, theology, any of that stuff. Just from the most America first case possible, there is zero reason for this. And the language has some vague expression about hoping to get one day to the point where the Palestinians can express self-determination. It's very vague, kick the can down the road language. Apparently, it was enough to satisfy the Saudis, the Qataris, whatever there. So the fact that the UN went along with this and ratified it, to me, shows that there is no obligation to create a Palestinian state. I think that Professor Kantarovich is right. By the way, one final related note in this before we move on to a different topic. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, he's been talking a lot about trying to ban or to get rid of Sharia law in the Lone Star State. Texas, which is a wonderful state and a very red state, does have an issue, incidentally, when it comes to Sharia law and radical Islam. That actually was a state that was the home of the Holy Land Foundation trial back in 2007, 2008, the George W. Bush administration, the largest terror financing trial in the entire history of the United States Department of Justice. That was based out of Richardson, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. You've probably seen the headlines over the past year or so of this planned Sharia-only, Muslim-only community in the Dallas suburbs. It's really quite harrowing stuff, frankly. So Governor Abbott, to his great credit, posting on X earlier today, quote, "Today I designated the Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR, or the Council on American Islamic Relations, as foreign terrorist and transnational criminal organizations. This bans them from buying or acquiring land in Texas and authorizes the Attorney General to sue to shut them down." That is based, as we might say. That is amazing. Fantastic stuff from Governor Abbott. And that is exactly what should happen at the federal level. I actually wrote a column 3 months ago now, I guess it was, back in August, following comments from Secretary of State Rubio to that effect. I said, this is the time. This is the time that the United States State Department really ought to formally categorize the Muslim Brotherhood and their various offshoots as terrorist organizations, as one of their offshoots, Hamas, has been so designated since 1997, since the Clinton administration. CAIR, by the way, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which far too many Democrats, Nancy Pelosi all the way on down, are far too toying with these days. CAIR was literally founded, and we know this, as a Hamas front group in the United States. There is ample evidence to back that up. There has been much written on this topic over the years. In fact, it is so abidingly clear that that is the case, that the UAE itself, the United Arab Emirates, banned CAIR as a terrorist organization in 2014. So, and this is the final word on this, but I mean, just how crazy is it that the Saudis are arresting people for flying the PLO flag? Meanwhile, you can fly the PLO flag and shove it in anyone's face you want to at Harvard Yard, on the one hand. On the other hand, the UAE banned CAIR as a terrorist organization back in 2014, but you have Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries and all the rest of modern Democratic leadership that are just yucking it up with these Hamas sympathizers, if not outright Hamas supporters. Square that circle for me. I thought this was America. Anyway, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, in D.C. today, he stands, for what it's worth, against a lot of that stuff. He is not a fan of the Muslim Brotherhood, which poses an existential threat to his monarchical regime there in Riyadh. I am very excited to see what comes of these meetings in Washington, D.C. In other news, the immigration crackdown continues. Charlotte, North Carolina is the latest place to see Tom Homan and the boys go in there trying to enforce this nation's panoply of immigration laws. Trump administration says the raids are taking place in Charlotte. They're saying that this is due to public safety. For what it's worth, the Charlotte mayor pro temp Dante Anderson tells CNN the city doesn't need the help. Let's go ahead and watch this.
They did indeed tell us that this was about public safety and crime. And I can tell you that Charlotte is a safe city. Our crime statistics are down double digit year over year. Violent crime is down. And we are laser focused on public safety through a whole community lens. So we don't need any assistance as it relates to crime and public safety. The presence of patrol is casting a wide net of fear and anxiety throughout our city, and it's actually hurting public safety.
So we need no help in public safety, says the mayor pro tem of the city where Irina Zarutska was brutally stabbed to death and murdered by someone with a 14 to 15 crime long rap sheet. Give me a break. Ma'am, you should be on your knees begging the feds to support you because you clearly have no idea what the hell you are doing. None. Outrageous. How you can get on national television to say that when you are the city where Irina Zarutska was brutally murdered not 2.5 months ago? I really, it just utterly baffles my mind. By the way, the governor of North Carolina, the very liberal Josh Stein, doubling down on what we just heard, also on CNN, Josh Stein talking about how ICE agents are targeting and racially profiling American citizens. Go watch this.
We've seen masked, heavily armed agents in paramilitary garb driving unmarked cars, targeting American citizens based on their skin color, racially profiling and picking up random people in parking lots and off of our sidewalks, going after landscapers simply decorating a Christmas tree in someone's front yard.
Okay, so there's a lot of confusion as to what the Supreme Court has said you can or cannot do when it comes to immigration stops. So the relevant legal threshold for ICE engaging in a request to see your immigration paperwork, your passport, your citizenship, whatever the case may be, the relevant legal threshold is reasonable suspicion. That is a much lower threshold, for instance, than the probable cause that is required in various other criminal procedure contexts. All you need is a reasonable suspicion that a given individual might be here illegally in order to justify an officer, typically a federal officer, but increasingly in a lot of states, Florida, Iowa, we're seeing a lot of these states that are now trying to get state-level agents to supplement and to assist the feds. That's a very interesting constitutional question. We'll hold that aside for now. So the relevant legal threshold is reasonable suspicion. Do you have that? Do you not? Well, funny enough, there actually was a directly on-point Supreme Court case about this just 2.5 months ago. It was a case called Noem, as in Christy Noem, versus Pedro Vasquez Perdomo. And the procedural posture of the case was essentially trying to stay a lower court order. So this comes up on what legal eagles refer to as the emergency docket. It was not on the merits docket. It was not a full oral argument. So it was a stay of a lower court decision. But Brett Kavanaugh, who was one of the swingier votes there, had a very, very interesting concurrence in this application to stay the lower court's rulings. So basically, the lower court, this comes out, the broader context here is this all stems from the ICE raids. I guess we use the left-wing media's term, fine. The ICE raids, operations, enforcement, whatever you want to call it. This all stems from the ICE enforcement operations in Los Angeles. Okay, so you had a liberal lower court judge in Los Angeles that basically said that you can't do this. They were engaged in racial profiling. Well, just 2.5 months ago, in this Noem versus Vasquez Perdomo case, the Supreme Court says, actually, lower court, you're wrong. There was no profiling here. This actually was all totally kosher and totally constitutional. And essentially what Brett Kavanaugh says in this concurrence where he spells it out is he says that it's true that you cannot single out someone's ethnicity or race as the sole and exclusive factor to justify a show me your papers type thing. But it can be one of many factors. It can be one of many factors justifying a request to see some sort of paperwork. Other such factors can be language. Are you speaking Spanish? Are you working in a certain type of industry? Are you in agriculture or landscaping or construction? These are all things. So here is Kavanaugh, right? To be clear, Apparent ethnicity alone cannot furnish reasonable suspicion. Under this court's case law regarding immigration stops, however, it can be a relevant factor when considered along with other salient factors. That's the key part there from that Vasquez-Perdomo case of the court 2 months ago. So this, I mean, surprise, this dim-witted Charlotte mayor pro temp and Josh Stein, the equally addle-brains governor, they have no idea what they're talking about. This is not racial profiling. This is just immigration enforcement. Now, some of these specific stats as to what's been happening in Charlotte the past few days are utterly astounding. I really just cannot believe some of this stuff. Nearly 21,000 Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina students were absent from school yesterday on Monday, November 17th. 20,935. That is approximately 15% of all the students enrolled in the entire county school district. What the hell? As the ever-quotable Stephen Miller put it on X, quote, so a conservative estimate is that 1/7 of a major southern public school district is here illegally. 1/7 of the kids just don't show up because they're afraid of ICE. What is this? Like, literally, what is this? When we have massive, massive urban areas where you have this percentage of people that just don't show up to school, they're going to be truants for a day. The truancy is apparently a thing if you're here illegally. It's absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. By the way, Border Patrol agents and ICE, they're expecting to move now from Charlotte to Raleigh, North Carolina. So they're really kind of focusing on the state of North Carolina for an area now. But there's this number is just so staggering. And if you're the kind of person who just rolls your eyes at that, I think that you are mistaken for doing so. This country was predicated on the notion of popular consent. Consent to the governed is one of the formidable and foremost principles undergirding this entire country. The entire notion of the preamble beginning with "we the people" is predicated on the notion of consent of the governed. Illegal aliens, by definition, are not here due to our consent. They snuck in, they came illegally. We didn't consent to that. We did not consent to that. Nor did we consent to having our property taxes cross-subsidize their public school tuition dollars. What a waste of money. I mean, holding aside like the morality, the consent of the governed, what a waste of money to have nearly 21,000 students, very few, if any of whom are probably actually paying for their own public school tuition, to just not show up. Who's paying for that? The actual citizen, the actual taxpayer. All this due to this stupid 1982 Supreme Court case out of Texas, which was the first time that they actually said that illegal aliens here, yes, they are constitutionally protected insofar as being able to enroll in this nation's public schools. A deeply, deeply, deeply mistaken decision at that time. I'm sure many of you, certainly folks in my own family, have had to foot the bill with ever-escalating property taxes due in part to cross-subsidize illegal aliens. It's wrong. It's very, very, very wrong. Now, the administration, sure, should be looking at the polling. They should be able to balance it out a little bit. I mean, the notion that the Trump administration was only going to go after criminal aliens and not actually go further than that, I think is nonsense. Go back and revisit what this president and vice president and Stephen Miller and all those guys said on the campaign trail. They repeatedly said that they were going to engage in the most sprawling deportation operation in the history of the country, and praise be to God, that is indeed exactly what they've done. Border crossings have fallen to historic lows, and that's amazing. The politics do matter, though, despite my admittedly very hardline stance on this. In fact, I'll give you a funny aside. We had my friend and Article 3 Project colleague Mike Davis recently on the show to talk about the state of lawfare and the pending Supreme Court docket and all that. Go back and listen to that episode from last week if you missed it. But I remember the first time that I actually met Mike in person. This was 6 years ago or so, give or take. We were in Washington, D.C. We went out, got a drink. And he said to me at the end, he said, "Hammer, you know what? You're a caveman conservative." And I said, well, "What does that mean? What is a caveman conservative?" And he said, Because all you talk about and all you want to do is throw people in jail and kick the illegals out of the country. I was like, okay, I mean, point taken. So those are my priors. I very much am a round them all up, deport them all kind of guy. I am an unapologetic immigration hawk, and I do not apologize for that for a second. I think that is the correct stance. But the administration certainly should be maybe playing the polls a little bit. I'm not saying the polls are against them. I don't think they are, actually. If anything, I think the polls, frankly, support what they're doing. The percentage of Americans who say to round them all up and kick them all out is actually the highest it's ever been in the entire history of recorded Gallup and Pew polling. The percentage of Americans who support that has more or less doubled, actually, from the time I was in law school, 2013, 2014, give or take, until now. It was very low during the Obama era. Trump has singularly shifted that playing field, and he's really shifted the Overton window on this particular issue of immigration enforcement way, way, way to the right. But, in a state like North Carolina, that's one of the nation's swing states there, maybe there's some more micro granular data that the people are really opposed to it. I don't know. All I'm saying is that that's the kind of stuff that I think probably should play some role. I'm not saying a big role, but some role in subsequent decisions moving forward. But anyway, I, for one, am very happy that ICE is doing this. And boy, is that stat, 21,000 illegal aliens not showing up, playing truants for a day. Get the hell out of here. I mean, is this America or what? I mean, that kind of thing really, 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 frankly, ticks me the hell off if you can't tell. Finally, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because, as you know, if you're a daily listener or watcher of the show, and by the way, make sure to watch us on YouTube over at Newsweek's YouTube page. If you're not actually watching the show on YouTube, if you're still listening to it wherever you get your podcast, that's totally fine. But make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube video as well. So if you like or if you listen or watch the show, you know that I'm not necessarily the biggest proponent of droning on and on about this Epstein story. Frankly, I just kind of can't wait for it to get out of the news at this point. But earlier today, speaking during his weekly press conference on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Mike Johnson was explaining why he thinks today's big Epstein vote is happening now. Here is Speaker Mike Johnson.
Truth is, the biggest proponents of this discharge petition were never actually interested in transparency or ensuring justice or protecting victims of this unspeakable tragedy, the Epstein evils. And how do we know that? Because the Democrats had every one of the Epstein files in their possession for the 4 long years of the Biden administration. The Biden Department of Justice had the files the entire time. And not a single one of the people who are so loud and animated right now, they never said anything about it for all those 4 years. None of them held press conferences. None of them demanded the release of the documents. And under Biden's DOJ, when they prosecuted just Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, not a single one of these Democrats or any of the proponents of the discharge ever made any noise about that at all.
And as far as why Democrats are interested now, Speaker Mike Johnson continued.
The truth is simple and straightforward and obvious for anyone who is willing to look at it objectively. Clearly, this is a political exercise for Democrats and a few others, sadly, and it is as deceitful and dishonest as their pointless stunt to shut down the government. Same ideology behind this. Democrats are trying to use the Epstein matter as a political weapon to distract from their own party's failures.
So that seems clearly right to me, as we've previously discussed on the show. Democrats looking for a quick turn away from the epic Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries capitulation on the government shutdown, where they were able to secure precisely 0 wins. That is why the internecine civil war fighting on the left has reached something of a fever pitch. Now, interestingly, the latest Democrat scalp that's been getting a lot of attention over the past 24, 36 hours, so to speak, from the most recent tranche of Epstein files, the 20,000 give or take emails that were released last week, and we'll see what comes in this discharge position set for later today. Ultimately, if the Pam Bondi DOJ agrees, which I think they will, given that Donald Trump now supports it as well. But the most recent victim, quote unquote, he's not really a victim. On the contrary, he's frankly an offender. But the most recent name that has been tossed about and bandied about, because people are now just finally sifting through this part of the massive email drop from last week, is Larry Summers. Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard University back in the early 2000s, from 2001 to 2006. He is currently an economics professor at Harvard University. Well, turns out that Larry Summers continued to be in very close touch with Jeffrey Epstein, well after Jeffrey Epstein was first pled guilty for his sordid dealings with young girls back in 2008. It's actually a 2019, there's a 2019 email to Jeffrey Epstein that showed Larry Summers discussing interactions that he had had with the woman. Okay, so Summers had this interaction, and he writes, quote, "I said, 'What are you up to?' She said, 'I'm busy.' I said, 'Awfully coy you are.'" And Epstein responds back. It is creepy as hell, by the way, isn't it? And Epstein responds back, "You reacted well. Annoyed shows caring. No whining showed strength." So Jeffrey Epstein is giving Larry Summers like dating advice. This dude was president of Harvard University, and oh, by the way, he was also Treasury Secretary to Slick Willie, to Bill Clinton. He was Clinton's final Treasury Secretary from 1999 to 2001. He also was one of the top economists in the Barack Obama White House. Funny how that works. Larry Summers, who is now saying that he's going to step back from public commitments because he's deeply, deeply ashamed. Well, I can't help but notice that the media, in reporting this story over the past 24 hours, are invariably just saying, Larry Summers, the former president of Harvard University. How about Larry Summers, the former Bill Clinton and Barack Obama top economist? Y'all don't want to go there, do you? We know that Bill Clinton was on the Lolita Express 30 plus times. We know that, well, we kind of know based on what we discussed on yesterday's show, that it looks like Jeffrey Epstein has an email from November 2016 talking about how Barack is over here in PB, aka Palm Beach, at a time when Barack Obama was, oh so coincidentally, campaigning for Hillary Clinton in South Florida. Are the media going to ask these questions or not? They show no interest in it. And that gives away the game, folks. Because, again, this is not about intellectual honesty. This is only about a ridiculous get Trump scheme. Seems to me like Donald Trump has nothing to hide. That is his stance. That's what Caroline Leavitt's saying. Seems to me like that is accurate. Jeffrey Epstein was a major, major Democrat. He was texting in real time with Stacey Plaskett, the non-voting congresswoman from the U.S. Virgin Islands, during this February 2019 hearing with Michael Cohen. They were strategizing, Epstein and Plaskett, about how to get Cohen to have testimony that would damage Trump. Jeffrey Epstein hated Donald Trump. He hated him. Absolutely hated him. So I agree with Donald Trump. Nip this thing in the bud, full transparency. The vote today will probably be close to unanimous. It'll be very, very, very high. Pam Bondi, the DOJ, they will probably go ahead and release this. At this point, just release what you got, okay? You're not going to get everything. You're not going to get back to those 2008 guilty pleas, the grand jury testimony. We've explained this in the show before. You're not going to get all of it, but release what you got. Rip the Band-Aid off. Let's just be done with this already, and let's frankly just get back to the issues that most of us care about: immigration, crime, economy, and all the above. I'm Josh Hammer. This has been today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show.